Inside the Kremlin right now, we are watching a war for survival. And this isn't about politics. This is not about ideology. It's just a desperate scramble for fuel, for cash, and for power. Because every drone strike, every refinery that burns, and every dead end in the Russian budget yet tightens further the noose on the Kremlin. This, what we see today, is in fact the Kremlin cannibalizing itself. It can no longer afford this war and sees very few other options. Today, as the money is drying up and the construction projects across the country begin to stall and the banks can no longer deal with all the defaults, the regime is just running out of cash. However, there's something very important to understand, and it is the key to understanding the Putin regime. Russia is not like a normal part of the international community. It can't just go out and get loans. Right now, it's facing hardships across the country. We see that the regional governors are going to Moscow asking for money. Even Belarus is coming and asking for more money. But this is important for a different reason. It's not about the budget, and it's really just not about Russia. It's something a little bit different. That is that the FSB, the Russian intelligence service, is in fact a mafia. His name is Vladimir Putin. But today what we see happening is that he has set the FSB free. He's unleashed them, not to fight the enemies of Russia, but to seize assets from its own. What we see today is a purge that is being born out of panic. Just look at the numbers. In 2025 alone, nearly 100 senior officials were arrested, fired, or found dead in ways that raised questions. And what's interesting about that? The targets are not the dissidents. They're not the people that oppose the regime. They're the managers of the system in Russia. And the message is very clear from Moscow. Your loyalty is worthless if we need your assets. And the pattern itself is sort of undeniable. The FSB is targeting all the arteries of the war economy: construction, transport, natural resources. And if you look around at recent Russian news, look at Tambov, Chelyabinsk, Kursk, governors who control the border regions there are being arrested. Now they're showing up in jail. In Dagestan, the state is seizing the oil terminals from local powerful figures. And this is not being done out of the interest of national security. It's just the blatant theft of assets by the FSB. All of this is just a transfer of wealth and of control from the regions to those most central to the Kremlin. And the message itself can be quite lethal. We saw recently when Russia's own transport minister was fired. Hours earlier, he had committed suicide. Now, what's interesting about that is just weeks later, the FSB took control of all the ports in Russia, something that had been his portfolio. And the FSB at this point is expanding its control across Russia. Because once you have control of the ports, you have a chokehold on all trade. You have the ability to take a percentage of everything coming in and everything going out. And fundamentally, that is what this is all about. What we are seeing inside of Russia, this purge, is not being done for some political reason or an ideological reason. This is being done because there's less money to go around. And because this is a mafia, their primary objective is to make more money. The banking system in Russia is facing a massive liquidity crisis, so much so that it's said to be up to 2 trillion rubles, which is about $25 billion. So now what we see is that the Kremlin is merging national security with resource seizures. So one hand is holding the gun and the other one is grabbing the cash, one could say. So the damage from this war, though, is leading to an internal collapse. Look at what's happened in the case of the Ryazan refinery, one of Russia's largest. Ukrainian drones were able to knock out 2 of the 3 main processing units. Production was slashed overnight by half. That single attack has crippled the fuel supply inside of Russia. In fact, today, it is more expensive to buy fuel in Russia than in the United States. And why that matters is it's not just for the consumers. Think about the war effort. 70% of Russia's military cargo is transported by train. And many of Russia's cargo trains, in fact, use diesel. Less diesel, that means slower troop movements. It means rationing on the fronts. So every successful strike by Ukraine is triggering another wave of purges inside of Russia. The FSB runs the fuel trade like a business. And that's why you so often see people from the oil industry going out of windows. It's not by coincidence. It's to keep them quiet. They knew too much. Because the FSB works very closely with businesses in Russia and abroad. It goes to them and offers them protection, or it hires experts to run things like the oil industry. But the reason it does that is not to benefit the Russian state. It's not worried about what this does for Russia. It's worried what this does for their own pockets. So when we look over what we've seen in the past 25 years of the Putin regime, there's one topic that comes up a lot, and that is criminality. Vladimir Putin at no point has acted in a way that would be indicative of a country that has a leader interested in trying to make the lives of his citizens better. Instead, he's given them the bread and the circuses. They've fixed some roads and they've made downtown Moscow very nice. But ultimately, he knows that his war has killed or injured over 1 million of his own soldiers. He knows it has completely depleted Russia's economy. And more than that, Russia's own demographic crisis is getting yet worse and worse. And none of this is being made better by Vladimir Putin. So what is the FSB doing today? What are they doing with these purges? It's very simple. Vladimir Putin, who was a former KGB guy, but then he was later the director of the FSB in 1999, he is allowing them to do what's necessary to seize more money. And there's two parts to why that is. One is because the Russian FSB is a mafia. But secondly, there's another reason. And that's because within the Russian power structure, there's different groups, there's different sections. Even the FSB has about 3 different sections, 3 different pillars of whom people back. But one thing they all have in common, everyone at the FSB, is that they view the military as being their opponents, as being their rivals. So right now, when you see the arrest of senior Russian military officers, you see the arrest of Shoigu, the former Minister of Defense's former right hand, what does that really mean? Why did he just get 13 years in prison? He was engaged in corruption. Isn't everyone in Russia engaged in corruption? Most certainly the case. You don't get promoted in the Russian military unless you helped for years your senior officers to cover up their corruption. And then you promote people underneath yourself who help you to cover up your own corruption. So why are they arrested? It's because they are taking assets, and there's simply less assets to go around today. There's less money for everybody. And so now the FSB needs to find more sources of revenue. And one of the sources of revenue is the military. It's now shaking down the regional governors, arresting people from the military, arresting contractors from the military. And it's at this point also arresting oligarchs. It's probably no coincidence they chose to arrest and seize all the assets for one of the largest gold producers inside of Russia. Why is that really? It would seem to make a lot of sense that gold, a resource that you can use anywhere in the world and would have value, is something very good to have when your own currency might have very little value by the end of this year. In fact, some economists have said that in order to close the budget deficits, the ruble may have to be devalued 25 to 50%. Keep in mind, the average Russian retiree spends more than 80% of their income just on rent, food, and utilities. So if you think about a 50% decrease in the value of your money, how would their lives be? But this is just a war machine that's running out of gas. And at this point, it's in triage. Because right now, they're doing everything they can to try to consolidate power, to take power away from other organs of the Russian government, and to put resources into their own pockets. Because what's more important for anything else for today's FSB is not what happens to Russia. It's actually not even what happens to Vladimir Putin. Sure, they use that angle. They explain to him that thanks to their hard work, he's protected, that Russia's stronger, that they are doing what is necessary to advance his interest. But why do they do that really? It's because they have a vested personal interest in seeing this happen. They have a personal interest in seeing the military fail, which then means that they are more trusted, which gives them more power and the ability to steal more resources. So when we look ahead, there's a few things we should probably keep an eye out for. One is simply that if you see more oligarchs getting arrested in the near term, more military officers being charged, more governors having handcuffs put on them, it's probably a good sign that something's going wrong. This is what regimes look like when they're reaching their terminal phase. They're reaching the end of their lives. Because right now there's just desperation. Everyone realizes if the US puts on the secondary sanctions, making it almost impossible for countries to buy Russian oil or gas, that would be very detrimental. Consider this, 40% of the Russian national budget comes from just the sale of oil and gas. Now, India and China are about 75% of all the purchases of oil and gas. So if they were to just stop, if tomorrow they just decided they were not going to buy more Russian oil or gas, that would leave an additional 30% hole in their Russian national budget. This is disaster. This is a quagmire. And everybody realizes it. Today, the Kremlin's elites are devouring their own. They're doing whatever is necessary to secure their own survival, to consolidate the resources as there's fewer and fewer. The scarcity is causing the survival instinct to kick in as they do their most to quash each other, no longer treating each other as allies, no longer even working together, but actively working against each other. And for Vladimir Putin, that could be a fatal flaw. Because ultimately, if you look at the history of coups and revolutions, when they occur and what sparks them, leading the military to believe that it might be abandoned, that it might be arrested, and that it might have all of its assets seized by people from the FSB, probably doesn't do a great deal to help improve the climate where the military is willing to sacrifice more. And when you're going after the oligarchs, many of whom have their own private military companies, it's probably going to do something to spark more fear. And if you're ultimately Vladimir Putin sitting in the Kremlin, distant from the reality of your own country, you might very well be putting your own self at greater risk. Because the day that somebody realizes that Vladimir Putin is no longer providing us security, but he now presents us as a threat, he now is a challenge to our own survival, that's the very moment that somebody might realize it's time for a Putin-free world. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting Ukraine.